All righty, this pew clock says it is 9, so that means it's probably about 9:02. And we'll go ahead and get ready to get started this morning as we're rolling on. Prayer list or any updates? I haven't even looked at the bulletin yet, so I can't tell you. Okay. I will mention my dad. He's been a little under the weather, and 89, every little under the weather thing sometimes gets a little concerning. I have not. Anybody heard anything on Tommy Turner's son? I have not heard. Have not heard anything. Trying to remember who else was on the list, who else, if anybody was having surgery or anything. Anybody got anything else? Our girl in England doing well? Good. All right, if nobody has anything else, Pete, if you would start us with prayer, we'll get going. Thank you, sir. Oh, all right. For those of us who are UK basketball fans, we now have a pope that is coaching the basketball team. Yeah, I'm sure he'll get tired of hearing that joke at some point. I will say this. If any of you followed that on social media this week, there are a lot of people who need to take chill pills and have some blue M&Ms. Because there were times this past week I was pretty disgraced to be a resident of the state of Kentucky the way some people acted. And so we'll get our social media preaching going on and, time to clean that up. That was pretty bad at times. All right, we're rolling on as we continue through our look at the Gospel of Mark. We actually got into chapter 2. And we're rolling on now. Turn over to beginning at verse 13. Mark chapter 2, verse 13. We're going to go look at right now through verse 17. And it reads, Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. Then passing by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. While he was reclining at the table at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who were following him. When the scribes who were Pharisees saw he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he told them, "It's not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." So here Mark tells something that really is not necessarily involved with specific preaching or healing, which we've seen a lot of this so far as we've been going through Mark. And this little section we'll sort of call the call of the kingdom to say. All right, tax collectors. These were a popular group of people, were they not? How did the Jews look at tax collectors, Roman tax collectors? Especially those who were Jews who were working for the Romans. These were not people that got invited. Well, they didn't have Christmas dinner at this time. They wouldn't have got invited to Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner. Probably didn't get invited to many dinners at all unless they went amongst themselves. Here is an old stone that had been sort of done up to represent tax collectors. This is in some ancient architecture, and this is similar to probably what a tax collector booth would have been looking like, where the tax collector is there and someone's coming in to pay, and he's determining what to pay and collecting the taxes for the Romans. The taxes levied by the Romans were many and varied. They had the poll tax. This had to be paid by every male over 14 and every female over 12. The aged were exempt. I don't know what the age line was. There was the land tax, the tributum agri, which was payable in kind. Both of these direct taxes were collected by Roman officials in Palestine. In addition, there were many forms of indirect taxation. Charges were made on all imports and exports, including the transportation of slaves. These were collected by the, whatever that word is, of the Gospels. They examined goods and collected tolls on roads and bridges. There was also a market toll in Jerusalem introduced by Herod. So as goods are coming in the road, they come to a toll assessor. He says, wait a minute. Okay, you got that, you got that, you got that, you get that. Okay, here's what your tax is. Indications are there was no standard. The guy just there at the booth said, this is worth this, pay this. And I thought we had taxes a lot. And you look at this, they were taxing it. One writer said, sure thinks that the customs raised at Capernaum in Galilee went into the treasury of Herod Antipas. In senatorial provinces, the Roman Senate took the money. Judea, however, was an imperial province, and the revenue collected went into the coffers of the emperor. As a class, the tax collectors were hated by their fellow Jews. This was almost inevitable. They represented the foreign domination of Rome. Their methods were necessarily inquisitorial. Now, what was another reason the tax collectors were necessarily hated? How'd they get paid? They took extra. If you were a tax collector and you wanted to get paid, Rome wasn't going to pay you out of what you collected. They left it up to the tax collector. Okay, you want to make $100 this week? You got to collect an extra $100 in taxes. So if the taxation part on, say, an item was $100, all right, he might tax them or charge them or assess them $120, and the 20 goes to him. So what happens here is you lead to a lot of corruption among the Jews who were collecting taxes for Rome, because, hey, I can take whatever I want as long as I give Rome what they expect. Rome doesn't care what I take. Rome didn't care if they took another 50%. Rome wanted what Rome was getting. And after that, it was up to you to make your own living. They often overcharged people and pocketed the surplus. In the rabbinical writings, they're classified with robbers. In the Synoptic Gospels, they're bracketed with sinners, as we see Matthew 9:10, 11:19, Mark 2:15, Luke 5:30, and 7:34. These were not well-respected people. And they were generally not good people. One writer said this shows the common attitude of the Jewish people toward them. They were considered to be renegades who sold their services to the foreign oppressor to make money at the expense of their own countrymen. When we were doing our discussions on the episodes of The Chosen, how did they portray Matthew and his relationship with his people? And Matthew didn't even have, as they portrayed him in that show, he didn't even have a relationship with his parents, did he? His parents have said, no, we don't want anything to do with you. You're hurting our people. The Mishnah prohibited receiving alms from a tax collector as his office, since the money was presumed to have been gained illegally. They wouldn't even take it. Here's alms. No. How'd you get that? You tax? No. You got it wrongfully. If a tax collector entered a house, look at this. All that was in the house became unclean. This is how bad these people were viewed. Tax collector enters your house. The whole house is unclean now. Everything in your house falls into unclean. The rabbis went so far as to say it was permissible to lie to tax collectors to protect your own property. What was one of the 10 Commandments? Wasn't lying really prohibited? We have a little case of situational ethics going on here, but the rabbis say it's okay to lie if you're lying to a tax collector so you can protect your own property. That's how much they felt they compromised some of their belief because of who the tax collectors were. It's all right for you to lie. If you're lying to a tax collector to preserve your property, it's okay to say you don't have it, or it's, whatever you got to do. Tax collectors were so hated because most of the time they were really dishonest. Of course, they were dishonest because they were trying to make their money because they didn't get a salary from Rome. It was just a situation, a system that opened its way up to all kinds of impropriety. And so they were not good people. Now look at verse 15 and just note what's going on here. In verse 15 it says, while he was reclining at the table in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who were following him. They were having a dinner gathering. Jesus is dining here with people that are at the bottom of the ladder. While he was reclining, they were dining, but there were many of them who were following him. Sinners, term sinners here. This is a technical term given by the Pharisees to Jews who do not have the time or inclination to attempt to follow their excessive rules. They aren't necessarily breakers of the Mosaic law, although undoubtedly some are. Sinners are also called people of the land. Now, some of these people were likely people who were known throughout the community as, wow, these are prostitutes. These are people who are thieves. These are people who do this. There are likely also some of these people who were just people that the Pharisees and scribes looked at and said, well, you don't do everything just right. You're not adhering to the full letter of the law. So you probably had a mix of people who were just blatantly doing not good things, and then people that the scribes and Pharisees would have deemed, you're not as good as us. You don't know the law like we do. You don't adhere to the law like we do. So it's all a lot of people. And what they're asking here, as we get to this, what they're really going to be asking is why it comes down to it, is why isn't Jesus eating with people like us? But these are people that the Pharisees are looked down on, and the scribes. Mark notes that some of those who are following Jesus are not those who would have been considered religious. At this point, I guess the people who would have been considered religious by the religious leaders are the scribes, the Pharisees, those who walked with their nose about this high up in the air. These are people who the scribes and the Pharisees would just not have considered good people. Not up to our standard. The scribes, as we see this in some of their reaction, the scribes deeply respect the dietary laws. No fewer than 4 sections in the Mishnah warn against eating with someone of the land. Not only were you supposed to be cleaned in a certain way before you eat, But you weren't supposed to eat with people who weren't of the right standard. You're not supposed to eat with those people. Not supposed to hang around with those people. Question, do we still carry some of that around today? Do we still sometimes look down at people that we shouldn't look down at just to say, oh, not going to hang with you, not going to do with you? But they had rules and guidelines, not God made, but man made guidelines that just said, we can't eat with these people. You're not supposed to eat with these people. You become unclean if you hang with these people. To eat with sinners means to risk eating with someone who is not properly tithed on his food and who might not be ceremonial clean. So the scribes here are looking at this and going, what if those people didn't, what if they're not clean? Did these people tithe on their food? Again, we see this, or we're going to see Jesus address that here in a minute. They get so caught up in the little legalistic things. They're more worried about, are they clean? Did they tithe? Well, why is Jesus having meals with these people? So now the scribes are wondering, what's he doing? They've questioned some of the healing and some of the statements he's made as we've looked over the last couple of weeks. They've questioned that and wondered what was going on. Now he's here. Supposedly he's confessed being who he is, and they're trying to figure all of this out. And now they see him eating with people that they don't socialize with. So their question now becomes, what is he doing? Looking around the room, and you don't have to say if you were the one to do it. Have you ever heard someone who professed to be Christian who looked at someone else and said, what are they doing? Why are they helping them? Why are they hanging out with them? Why are they taking the time to socialize or be friends with them? And that's what they're doing here. They're looking at this, Jesus being here at Matthew's house with all these sinners. What's he doing? So Jesus gives them his answer. Jesus gives them his answer. Verse 17, when Jesus heard this, he told them, it's not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners. All right, from your standpoint, what is he saying here? Do you go to the doctor? Well, some of us do now. We go for checkups and preemptive things. But generally, do you go to the doctor? You go to the doctor when you're sick and you need something taken care of. And Jesus is saying, I'm not here for those who think they're righteous. I'm here for those who recognize that they're sick. Now, as we learn elsewhere in the Bible, who is righteous? What man is righteous? Jesus. Jesus only. So outside of Jesus, who is righteous? The Bible tells us none. So what Jesus is really saying here, I came for everybody. But I think especially he's making the statement, if you believe you're righteous, you're not going to see the need for me. But if you recognize that you're a sinner and you're fallen and you need help somehow that you can't get yourself out of, that's why I'm here. Now, Mark and Luke pretty much write this scene the same way. One of the other parallel gospels has a very important difference. Anyone know which one has the difference? Let's turn over to Matthew. I think it's chapter 5. Forgot to note that down. May have been before that. Well, it would have helped me if I'd have noted that. Let me see. It makes the citation here. And I meant to bookmark that before I got here and did not. Chapter 9, okay. Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Chapter 9, and beginning of verse 12, says, "Now when he heard this, he said, 'It is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick.'" Here's the difference that Matthew notes, verse 13. "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners." So Matthew makes a little bit different point. He tells them, go look up what this means. Now, what's he quoting? Hosea 6:6 says, the prophet writes, "For I desire faithful love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." So as Matthew writes it here, and he puts in this quote, what's the point? Is Jesus really saying, is Jesus' point here, hey, I don't want the legalistic. I don't want you following to the jot and the tittle of the law. What I really want is you to have mercy, love for one another, love for God, and know God. Think about it. And in this setting, Jesus is just there, probably doing some teaching and having a meal with people that they look down on. They're caught up in who he's eating with, what might have happened or not happened in preparing for the meal. And Jesus is saying here, I came to reach out to those who are sick with sin. And then he makes the reference, according to Matthew, back to Hosea, and it's, I'd rather have faithfulness. I'd rather have mercy than sacrifice. He didn't come for those who already thought they were righteous. He came for those who knew that they were sick. One writer says, on one level, he explains his mission as a friend of sinners who comes to save lost people. However, Jesus also subtly rebukes the religious leaders who see themselves as righteous and without the need of Jesus and the salvation he provides. Jesus comes to provide salvation for who? Everyone. And so everyone needs his salvation. No one is righteous. But the Pharisees, the scribes, they all believed, well, we're righteous. We're doing the law. We know the law. And what Jesus is trying to say here is he came for these people and that everyone needs his salvation. And that he desires love and mercy and compassion and faithfulness and willingness to know God more than all of the other. Jesus is not saying some people are sick and some people are well here. He's making the point. The message of the gospel is that everyone is sick and everyone is under condemnation. And he came for all. He came to heal everybody. This is going to be a little hard for the Pharisees, a little hard for the scribes, that he came for everybody. Romans 3:10 says, as it is written, there is no one, we talked about this a minute ago, as it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. But the point is, unless you recognize that you're not righteous, you don't realize the need for a doctor. For those of us who deal with colds and allergies, you don't really realize that you may be getting sick until you start sneezing and hacking and coughing, then you realize it's a need for a doctor. But before that point, you may not realize you need a doctor. And what Jesus is saying, he's coming for all, but if you think you're righteous, you're not going to recognize your need for him. It's when you hit that point you realize that you're not righteous and that you are lost. That's when you realize that you need the great physician. What Jesus is saying is that the people who go to the doctor are those who know they're sick. They admit there is something wrong. They realize that they will not be made well. And they need help and they know it. It sounds like, you look at that list, it sounds like the point we all reach at some point as it pertains to sin is that at some point we recognize we're a sinner. We recognize that causes something to be wrong in our life. We recognize we can't fix it on our own. And we realize at that point we need help. And that's the point Jesus is trying to make here. The doctor has no value of you if you do not recognize your sickness and then go to the doctor for treatment. You could be laying home sick in your bed, but if you don't recognize your need for the doctor, that doctor across town doesn't do you any good, does he? The doctor does you no good till you go to him for healing. We can recognize, or until we recognize that we are lost in sin, and then until we go to the doctor, the great physician, for the healing of the sin, it does us no good. But we have to recognize first that we're lost in sin. The call is not to the people who think they're saved here. The call is to the people who are lost and know it. Because if you think you're already saved, you're not going to go, are you? The call Jesus makes is to those who see that their lives are irreparably hurt and that they need him. They need something. Writer says how often we will pre-sort people into those who we think will listen to the gospel, but usually the people we pre-sort for the gospel are those who do not think they are sick. We pick out people who seem to be morally good and try to give them the gospel, and they do not receive it because they do not see their sickness. I think the point I got from what this writer says is the people who are really lost and deep down in the life of sin, we're going, ooh, I don't want to talk to you. All right, here's somebody, you're not a bad person. Let me tell you about Jesus. They don't see their need for Jesus, and we don't ever reach out and get any success with them. It's the people who are very, very lost, the people who are deep in sin, who need him the most. And as we see the example here, the Pharisees are questioning, the scribes are questioning Jesus for hanging out with those people. Do we avoid people who are lost or people who are caught up in sin because we're like, no, wow, look at you? Because that's what Jesus is pointing out here. It's those who are sick that need him the most. We pick out people who seem to be morally good and try to give them the gospel. Sometimes we pick out people who are more like us, who live like us, who drive the same type cars as us, the people who are similarly financially to us. We try to take them the gospel, and sometimes we miss the people who most need it. We're often afraid to take the gospel to the people who are notorious sinners. Jesus is declaring that the gospel is for sinners just as they are. Jesus was teaching and dining with people who were deeply lost, who were recognized as notorious sinners, and still yet the scribes would go, what are you doing? They didn't see what his true purpose was. The gospel is for people. The gospel is for sinners as they are, as we are. But notice what Jesus is doing. Notice what he's doing. Jesus is in Levi's house eating with these tax collectors and sinners. Jesus does not merely preach repentance. Jesus befriends sinners. None of the three accounts that we've talked about here of this scene, none of them say, Jesus told them you need to repent before we can eat, did it? Nowhere did Jesus say, you got to be saved and then I can hang out with you and eat with you. Jesus is hanging out, fellowshipping with people who need him, opening the door so that he can teach them and reach them. We need to befriend those who need Jesus. Is it easier to reach someone after you've gotten to know them, or is it easier to do what in sales people would call a cold call and tell somebody about Jesus? I heard some. To know them. You know, you're going to have better luck building a relationship with somebody for 3, 4, 5, 6 months than going up to somebody's door on a cold call. Hey, I'm from Southside. You need to be baptized, follow Jesus, or you're going to hell. Now, here's the problem. How many times have we tried that approach? That's why some of the community outreach things that we do, the involvement that we do, is just as important as knocking on doors. There's a place for knocking on doors. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but we're going to be far more effective after we establish relationships with this. I'm going to bring this up. We talked about it last summer when it happened. And this sort of is a little thing, but it's sort of neat, and it's sort of the reaction we got. If you all remember last year during softball season, at the end of the season, it came tournament time. The rec department simply refused to let us out of a game during VBS week. And after back and forth, they just made us play. So we were reluctantly got done with VBS, or some hauled out of VBS, or some skipped VBS, and we went that night. The opposing team before the game had the prayer, and they prayed for our VBS because they knew what had gone on with us, trying to get a game rescheduled so we could have everybody could take part of VBS and not miss one or the other. Sometimes building relationships and being out in the community and doing things out there enable us to build relationships to carry that message. And I think the thing with the softball thing last year is that people saw that how important it was to us. And I think the other things we've done in the past, the outreach with the special needs, the single mothers car care clinics, we make as much statement and headway with those kind of things as we do just knocking on the door or saying, come to church. We do need to invite people to church and get them in here and see the things and see what we're about and see what Jesus is about. But a lot of times building that relationship first is the first step to doing that. Another question. Is it easier to invite somebody to church and get them to accept the invitation after you've known them for 3 months, or when you first go up and say, hey, come to church Sunday? And they're like, who are you? But if you've had the chance to maybe get to know them a little bit, talk with them, find out things about their life, have a cup of coffee with them, have a meal with them, and then you say, hey, come to church. We got a lot of great things going on. We can't isolate ourselves from the world and teach the world about Jesus. Here's Jesus having dinner with tax collectors and sinners, opening the door to him. And the scribes and the Pharisees are sitting there going, what are you doing? Do we ever sit there and go, what are you doing? Yeah. This is sort of probably what the scene looked like. It was probably a dinner-type party. There was probably laughter and talk and conversation. Jesus may have been teaching some, but it was more of a chance for Jesus to get to know these people. These people get to know Jesus, and in turn, he builds that relationship so he can tell you, now, here's why I'm here. The kingdom. As we look at his kingdom, the kingdom is a kingdom for outcasts, isn't it? And as you look at in terms of sin, are we all outcast? Were we all outcasts before we became Christians? The answer is yeah. His kingdom is all about come on in. Because we were all outcasts because of our sin. The kingdom is a kingdom for people who know they're spiritually sick and are looking for treatment. Even after we become Christians, we still have problems with sin. The kingdom is a kingdom for people who are spiritually weak and know that they need help. The kingdom is not for people who are pretending to be fine and do not need a doctor. Because if you think you're fine and you think your spiritual life is okay, you're not going to be really receptive to hearing about it, are you? It's when you recognize that you need something, that you need Jesus, that you come to Him. The kingdom is not contaminated by sinners. The kingdom is not contaminated by sinners. Sometimes I get the feeling that Christians, and I'm using this term sort of generally, that Christians think that, oh, you're too bad to come to my church. You need to get your life right before you come to my church. Let me ask you, what's the difference between a person who is a Christian and a person who's a sinner? One difference. One difference. Our sins are covered by the blood of Him. We're still sinners. We still sin, don't we? Anybody in here live a perfect life this week? Anybody in here live a perfect life this month? We still sin and fall short. The difference is our sins are covered. We go to Him with forgiveness, and through Jesus' blood, we're covered. That's the difference between us and those who are in the world. The only difference. The kingdom brings restoration and healing to the sinner, reconciling them to God. That's Jesus' point. I came to reconcile those who are estranged from the Father and recognize that they are estranged. The kingdom is not a kingdom for those who have it all together. The kingdom is for those who are broken and who are looking for a way to start putting it back together. How many of you have it all together? Anybody in here got it all together? You got up this morning and it's all rosy, got no problems anywhere in the world. How many of you are going to have it all together through this entire week this week? Not me. His kingdom is for those who don't have it all together. We recognize that we're broken and we need Him. We need His salvation. We need Him to start putting it back together. That's who the kingdom's for. It's not for the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees who thought, hey, we're good people. We got it all happening. It's for those who recognize I ain't going to get it happening except through Him. Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Jesus didn't preach that, hey, if you got it happening and you're walking it perfectly, it's yours. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those whose spirits are broken. And you recognize that you need Him, because for you is the kingdom of heaven. The Amplified version of that has it really neat. Blessed, spiritually prosperous, happy, and to be admired are the poor in spirit, those devoid of spiritual arrogance, those who regard themselves as insignificant, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, both now and forever. The Amplified goes on to say, blessed, forgiven, refreshed by God's grace are those who mourn over their sins and repent, for they will be comforted when the burden of sin is lifted. One quote I found said, have you noticed how God uses ordinary, imperfect people, people who don't get it right all the time, to do extraordinary things to advance His kingdom? And as we've been going early through Mark here, early in the book, look at who the people Jesus is hanging with. Look at the people He's calling. Fishermen. Now we got Matthew, tax collector. Yet Jesus does amazing things with these people. No matter where you are, no matter where you have been, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you've done, Jesus can do amazing things with you if you will just turn it over to Him. You don't have to get it all together before He can. He can do that. He can handle that part. He just needs you to turn it over to Him. Jacob lied. I love this. I've seen this before and I put it in here. Jacob lied. Moses murdered. Saul hunted down Christians. David had an affair. Peter disowned Jesus. God used every single one of these people to build the kingdom. You're never too far gone for God to use. Don't let the devil steal your story. Let Christ rewrite it. The devil's going to tell you, oh, you've done some things he ain't never going to forgive. You can't get this straightened up. God can't make anything right with you. You just might as well throw up your arms and quit. But yet you look at these examples. And God did amazing things with people who did not give up. 1 Timothy 1, 15 and 16 says, Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and Paul wrote, of whom I am the worst. Jesus says, as he said here, he didn't come to save the righteous. He came to save sinners, of who we all probably could say we are of the worst. Luke 18:13, and the publican standing afar off would not lift up so much as his eyes into heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. When we're talking about broken in spirit, this is it. God, I can't even look up towards your face because I have done so many things. I've been so bad. I've treated others so bad. I've not done the things I know I should do for you. God, I shouldn't even be looking up towards you saying a prayer. And that's the attitude here the publican has. That's the broken spirit. That's the sickness. That's the illness that Jesus has come to heal. The people that recognize, I need help. And that's what the point Jesus is making here in the dinner with the publicans, with the Pharisees, with the tax collectors and the sinners. You're not forgiven because of how good you are. There may be some that try to teach you that, and we're not forgiven because of anything we can do. If we could be forgiven because of how good we could be, Jesus didn't have to die. We're not forgiven because of the things we do. We are forgiven because of the one thing He did. We are forgiven because we realize how terrible our sins are and we turn to Him. The righteous think they can heal themselves. The righteous think they're healthy. The righteous think they are doing good. The righteous think they can make themselves right before God. And really, the term we would use today in front of this, we'd add one word in front of this. What would be the word that we'd add in front of early in these statements? In our English language and the way our language flows today. We'd add one four-letter word to the front of this. Self. The self-righteous think they can heal themselves. The self-righteous think they're healthy. The self-righteous think they are doing good. And the self-righteous think they can make themselves right before God. Who makes us right before God? Jesus does. That's how we're righteous before God. Sinners know how utterly, those Jesus is talking about here, those sinners know how utterly sinful they are, bow their knees to Jesus, knowing that there is nothing we have to offer except our humble sorrow and complete brokenness. When we reach the point, we say, Jesus, I can't take it. I can't do it. I can't make anything of it. I need you to fix it. That's who He came for. That's why Jesus is saying, I didn't come for the righteous. I came for sinners. One writer said, when you think you're broken by your sins so that you think you cannot do this, that you cannot be good enough or be what the gospel has called you to be, that is when Jesus says to you that you are exactly where He wants you to be. Because when you reach that point, you say, Jesus, here, it's all yours. I can't do it. When you're that broken in spirit, you turn to Him and say, it's yours. Because I sure can't do it. I've messed it up. That's when Jesus says, you're where I want you. Let me take it. Let me heal you. This also gives us the example of how we are to be separate but not isolated from the world. Jesus didn't say, you guys get it together and then I'll come have dinner with you. Jesus went and had dinner with him, befriended him, and began to have the opportunity to teach. And with the crowd, that's where we're here. We'll pick up Mark 2, verse 18 next week, and we'll get into chapter 3, hopefully, push all the way through there.